Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving into the incredible story of one of your body's hardest working but least appreciated organs, the pancreas. And we're going to find out what happens when this vital organ gets pushed to its absolute breaking point by the modern sugar-loaded diet.
All right, so here's our game plan. We'll start by properly introducing our unsung hero, the pancreas. Then we'll watch as it faces a relentless sugar onslaught, which pushes it right to its breaking point. From there, we'll look at the collateral damage, untangle a really controversial link to cancer, and finally ask the big question: what can we do to ease this incredible burden? Okay, first things first. Before we get into the struggle, we really need to meet our main character, the pancreas. It's an absolute master of keeping your body in balance.
And what's so amazing about it is that it's basically doing two massive jobs at once. On one side, you've got its endocrine function. Think of it like a hormone factory, pumping out insulin and glucagon to keep your blood sugar just right. Then, on the other side, it's a digestive powerhouse, creating all the enzymes you need to break down food. It's a serious multitasker.
All right, now let's introduce the villain of our story, the modern diet, or more specifically, the sheer, unprecedented amount of sugar we consume. This puts a kind of strain on the pancreas that it just never evolved to handle.
And this is where things get really interesting, because it turns out our body handles different sugars in completely different ways. I mean, they are not all created equal. Take glucose, that's our body's main fuel. The pancreas sees it and immediately releases insulin. But fructose, that's a whole different ballgame. The pancreas barely even notices it. Instead, it makes a beeline for the liver, where it often gets converted directly into fat.
So what happens when you have this constant metabolic pressure from sugar day in and day out? Well, you can develop something called insulin resistance. It's like your body's cells start putting their fingers in their ears and ignoring insulin's signal. And that forces the pancreas to shout louder and louder. It has to pump out way more insulin just to get the same job done.
And this is the moment the pancreas's struggle really begins. It goes into overdrive, compensating by working overtime, pumping out more and more insulin just to keep your blood sugar in that safe, narrow range. It's a truly heroic effort, but it's not sustainable.
Because, no hero can fight an overwhelming force forever. Eventually, the specialized little cells in the pancreas that actually make the insulin, they're called beta cells, they start to get tired, they get strained, and ultimately they start to fail. This is the breaking point.
You can see the whole tragic journey right here. It all starts with that increased demand for insulin. So the beta cells compensate. They work harder. They get bigger. But that leads to an incredible amount of cellular stress. The system is just overworked. And finally, failure. The cells just get exhausted and start to lose their ability to function, or they even die off.
Now let's zoom way in, deep inside the cell itself. The sheer demand for insulin puts a massive strain on the cell's protein-making machinery, which is called the endoplasmic reticulum, or ER. I mean, get this. Just making the precursor to insulin can take up 50% of the cell's entire protein-building power. This crazy overload causes a condition known as ER stress, and it's a major reason these cells start to break down.
And what's just wild is that these overworked cells don't always just die. Some of them go through this process called de-differentiation. It's almost like they get amnesia. They literally lose their identity. They forget that their job is to make insulin, and they just revert back to a more basic, kind of useless type of cell. The end result of all this stress, this confusion, this cell death, it's absolutely catastrophic. And just look at this number. It is staggering. Autopsy studies have shown that by the time somebody's actually diagnosed with type 2 diabetes, they may have already lost up to half of their functional beta cells. Half. Right, so a failing pancreas doesn't just happen in a vacuum. Its breakdown sends these dangerous ripples throughout the entire body, creating all sorts of collateral damage.
So one of the first major problems you see is something called non-alcoholic fatty pancreas disease. And this is exactly what it sounds like. Fat, often thanks to all that fructose going to the liver, actually starts to build up inside the pancreas itself. And this fatty infiltration causes inflammation and messes up both of the pancreas's big jobs, digestion and hormone production.
In some situations, this metabolic chaos can go from bad to worse fast. It can trigger an acute, life-threatening crisis. See, when the liver is overwhelmed with sugar, it just starts pumping out tons of fat, triglycerides, into the blood. And when those levels get super high, they can cause a severe, incredibly painful inflammation of the pancreas.
And the damage from all this chronic inflammation and fat can get so severe that it causes a completely different type of diabetes. This isn't type 1 or type 2, It's called type 3C diabetes, and it's caused by the direct physical destruction of the pancreas. It just perfectly underlines the devastating collateral damage that can happen.
Okay, so all of this damage and stress naturally leads to one of the most serious and frankly scariest questions out there. Does this long, hard struggle with sugar actually increase the risk of pancreatic cancer? Well, the scientific answer, it's murky and it's complicated.
So let's just ask the question, point blank. Does sugar cause pancreatic cancer? What does the actual science, the big, large-scale studies have to say about this? Is there a clear link?
Now, this might actually surprise you. When scientists look at these massive studies involving huge numbers of people, many of them come to a similar conclusion. For the general population, the evidence for a direct, slam-dunk link between sugar and pancreatic cancer is, well, it's pretty weak. Or, as this quote says, the support is limited.
And that word, inconsistent, is absolutely key here. It means the findings from different studies are kind of all over the map. Some high-quality studies find no link at all. Some find a small positive link. Others find a slightly stronger one. And it's because of this inconsistency that there's no simple yes or no answer.
But, hold on, that doesn't mean there's zero risk. One absolutely massive study found a really striking connection, but it was only in a very specific group. As you can see here, for young adults under the age of 40, drinking 2 or more sugary drinks per day was linked to a 3-fold increase in the risk of dying from pancreatic cancer. 3 times the risk.
And this is where we get to the real nitty-gritty nuance of it all. The risk isn't a blanket thing for everybody. It seems to be concentrated in certain groups who might already be under some kind of metabolic stress. For example, one study found the highest risk in overweight and sedentary women, and another, as we just saw, pinpointed those young adults with a high intake of sugary drinks.
Okay, so we've been on this whole journey. We've seen the struggle, the breakdown, the collateral damage. So what's the path forward? What's the takeaway? Well, if the core problem is an overburdened organ, then the solution has to be about finding ways to ease that burden.
When you really think about it, the story of the pancreas is a story about an ancient, finely tuned system that is suddenly facing a very modern problem it never evolved to handle. Which really leaves us with one final big question to chew on. Our bodies were built for a world of scarcity. How on earth do we help them not just survive, but thrive in this modern age of excess?
You know that sweet treat you love? Ever stop and think what it's actually doing inside you?
To really get it, we're going to zoom in on one of the body's unsung heroes, the pancreas.
I mean, this thing's a powerhouse, juggling digestion and hormones. But what happens when we overload it?
It's all about keeping your blood sugar in that perfect sweet spot. Not too high, not too low. It's a delicate dance, really. Insulin brings sugar down, and glucagon brings it right back up. The thing is, our pancreas just wasn't built for the constant sugar assault of our modern diet.
That's over 100 pounds a year. Just imagine the stress on that one little organ.
Okay, so are all sugars bad? Not exactly. Let's look at the big two, glucose and fructose.
See, fructose is kind of sneaky. It doesn't spike your insulin, but your liver turns it straight into fat.
And that fat doesn't just stay put. It starts to build up in the pancreas, poisoning the environment.
So your pancreas kicks into overdrive, pumping out insulin like crazy. But it can't keep that up forever.
This isn't a sudden event. It's a slow, steady march from overwork to complete cellular burnout.
It's wild. The cells don't just die. They literally forget what they're supposed to do. Cellular amnesia. And this creates a terrible, vicious cycle. High sugar causes damage, which just leads to even higher sugar.
Which brings us to the really scary question. Does all this sugar lead to cancer?
So, a huge U.S. study said no link. But hold on, that's not the end of the story.
Because another massive study, this time in Asia, found something much more worrying.
For young adults, just 2 sugary drinks a day was linked to a 3 times higher risk of dying from it.
Turns out, the biggest risk is when high sugar teams up with other unhealthy habits. A perfect storm. So, while sugar might not light the match, it definitely pours gasoline on the fire.
The good news in all this, you can absolutely do something to lighten your pancreas's heavy load.
Making these simple changes can give this vital organ the fighting chance it really, really needs. Look, your pancreas works 24/7 for you, so the real question is, what are you going to do for it?